Hello and welcome to episode number 50 of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast. Today is Sunday, May 24th, 2015. I'm Melissa Agnes, and this podcast is brought to you by Agnes Day. Let's talk crisis intelligence. Garth, welcome back to the show. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about what you do?
Good to be back, Melissa. So we've worked together for a couple of years now. I'm a former reporter specializing in critical communications, and you and I did the podcast on running a crisis simulation a few months ago.
We did. You also were the one to interview me on my TEDx talk a couple weeks ago.
That's right. I got the pleasure of doing that. And now we're back again, and we're talking about online shaming.
We are. And actually, for listeners' benefit out there, so, I'm always trying to just bring you the most relevant and timely information and news and crisis preparedness tips and all that. And so Garth had this really great idea to talk about online shaming, and which is a really, really great topic. It's very timely. It's just so relevant today and has so many repercussions, as you'll hear throughout this conversation, both for, personal brand, professional brand, as well as corporate repercussions. So it's an interesting conversation, but as many of my podcasts, this conversation was recorded a few weeks ago, and since then, it seems like online shaming is just continuing to be in the news. So before we get into the conversation about online shaming that Garth and I had already planned for you, Garth and I wanted to jump on a quick call just to kind of bring up the topics that are just so fresh right now in the media. And then we'll go on to listen to what we had discussed and recorded previously. So with that said, why don't you line that up, Garth?
Yeah, so we really want to talk about the very strong and harsh and vulgar attack on a Toronto TV reporter. Her name is Shauna Hunt of City TV in Toronto. And she was at the Toronto Football Club match. And she was subject to verbal abuse, sexually oriented verbal abuse. And since then, the video's gone viral because she turned the camera on the abusers. So she hit back.
Which was so powerful. And actually, this isn't an isolated event. Apparently, which I didn't know before this news made media, was that this same phrase that's being shouted out to female reporters who are broadcasting live around the world, if I'm not mistaken, has been happening for almost a year now. So it's the same chauvinistic, derogative phrase that is very insulting. It's sexual harassment, like you said, or it's verbal harassment, not sexual harassment. Verbal harassment with sexual innuendo. And she kind of just had enough, and she turned around and said to the men who had done it, and said, "Why would you do that?" And what was interesting was they then showed their total immaturity by laughing and saying, because it's funny, and no matter what she said, they always came back with some really stupid comments. But then it went viral. The story went viral, and a lot of people were in support. Actually, the majority of people were in support of Shauna Hunt because everybody's been tired of this. I mean, since then, actually, CBC just did a piece on this, and they started this piece off with speaking to all kinds of female reporters from around the country, and some of them broke down in tears because of the harassment that they're subjected to. And so Shauna Hunt had enough and turned around and turned the mic to them, and she got all kinds of praise from all kinds of men and women from around the country and probably across North America. And as it turns out, because it was on camera, they were able to identify one, anyways, of the men who just was relentless and thought it was so funny and kept going and kept going. And he, as a consequence, was fired from his job.
He was, yeah. And the other main perpetrator, he was known as well, and he was outed on social media, so his employers know about him. But what's interesting, the guy who lost his job, he's got a government job. So he works for Hydro One, a big electricity provider in Ontario. And if you're Hydro One, and we want to look at this side of things, you're dragged into the middle of this crisis now, and a couple of things. I mean, what can Hydro One do? What should they do? If you think of it, what are their options? Well, first of all, he was on his own time, and he wasn't wearing any Hydro One paraphernalia to mark him. But of course, he's on social media, so people who know who he works for. So either you don't do anything, which is going to be very strange and very hard to explain, I guess, to your other employees, especially the female population, but also hard to explain to the public and hard to explain to the taxpayer as well. So they ended up firing him. And that's a sign of the times. And I think that's people say, well, was that justice? I mean, he was obnoxious, he was ignorant, he was rude, all these things. He lost his job. I think, well, that's a sign of the times. If you take on a reporter, if you have the poor judgment to stand there in front of a camera and continue with your idiocy, to put it lightly. If you continue with that, you've got to know that there's going to be consequences. And if you don't know that, then you've got pretty poor judgment.
Absolutely. And, it's really fascinating that we are in a time today where, because you're right, he wasn't wearing any branded paraphernalia from his work. He never announced that where he worked. He was on his own time. But, looking from a crisis prevention, risk management, and crisis preparedness point of view, Hydro One, I believe, there's two ways to look at it. First, I would ask as a crisis consultant, I would say, okay, was this an isolated event? Was he out with, it's been said even on CBC in their report, this bro mentality? Was this that where he got swept up in the moment and he lost judgment? Maybe he had a few beers, he came from a game, and is he a completely different person with the people with whom he works? Or is this the type of person this is? Are the women at his place of work, are they subject to this type of vulgarity and discrimination on a regular basis, or even on a semi-regular basis? It doesn't matter. And then the second question becomes, and if the answer to that is yes, Hydro One could then be approached and said, well, how come you're not paying attention to this? How come? Do you not have a process internally that allows for people to report other people, whether anonymously or not, to report on unacceptable behavior or conduct or risk? This is a crisis preparedness program. This needs to be involved in every crisis preparedness program. So Hydro One could have, the lights could have easily, because it went so viral, the tables could have turned onto them and said, well, how come? So I think that they did the responsible thing, especially if they did some research, I don't know, but if they did some internal research to find out who this person is and how he behaves, when he's at work, and if this is common behavior from him or common mindset from him. So anyways, it really is interesting to see what times we're in, and how, that's what I said at the start. I mean, your conduct today, and we have to remember this as professionals, as people, children, teenagers need to understand this, which is the hardest thing, I think, because our conduct in our everyday life is captured today on video. This time they asked for it. They knew the camera was rolling and they just had really poor judgment. But it happens all the time where things are caught on camera. You don't realize it. It goes viral, and you suffer some major consequences because the organization needs to, for whatever reason, take a step back and disassociate themselves with you, which actually probably is a good segue to lead into the remainder of this conversation, because we talk about such cases like that, don't we, Garth?
Well, we absolutely do. And just to finish off on the Hydro One story, I think it really shows that there is no private time. There's a time when you are at work, but once you're got a presence on social media, you're on all the time, and it's going to come right back at you. My only worry is, will this punishment put off other people. I think it'll put off people with something to lose. He had a pretty interesting job. I mean, he was paid over $100,000 a year, so it's not small change. So folks who've got things to lose will think twice and three times before they do something as crass as that again, you'd think.
I hope so.
But folks who have got nothing to lose or less to lose, I wonder if they'll just continue to think that it's hilarious and keep on with the behavior.
You know what? Sorry, but just that, listening to that, there's people out there that you can't change them. They're, I don't know what it is. They're immature. They're jerks. I don't know. But and the ones that have nothing to lose, what I would like to see is we can't change that. We can't change the people who have nothing to lose and who don't care. However, we can, as a society, stop tolerating this type of behavior or this type of conduct. And we're going to talk for the remainder of this podcast on online shaming, about online shaming. And we're going to get into that, actually. So, I think that as a society, we have to just take more responsibility. And it's interesting because when Shauna Hunt was, turning the tables on these men, there was a crowd around her and nobody said anything. So that's also interesting. And the same in the conversation that we have about online shaming, like this is a mob mentality. This is thousands and thousands of people. And my goodness, you're going to hear some stories so we have to, as adults, as citizens within a shared community worldwide, we have to also kind of put down our foot and say, you know what, we're not going to accept this, and we're not going to edge it on or egg it on. We're not going to, and then we're also going to be more responsible for ourselves and learn these lessons, even just through other people, so that you don't suffer these types of consequences yourself.
Yeah, I think what we saw with her was maybe the start of the new era and the start of the change. So good to see it.
Absolutely. All right. So thank you for this brief discussion. And now I'm going to, play on to what we did talk about in online shaming. We go into so much more detail and so many great stories and so many great takeaways and lessons for both the professional and the organization for your crisis preparedness. And here we go.
And hardly a day goes by when there isn't some new version of this, isn't it? Really? And the thing is, shaming itself has been around since the beginning of time. We used to have things like putting people in the stocks and throwing veggies at them. In the pillories, there was public floggings, stone throwing. It's like now what we've got is whipping. Yeah, now we've got a modern day Game of Thrones going on through social media.
We really do, and it's really destroying some reputations.
It is, and we've got some examples that we picked out that we want to talk about with folks. We want to look at some of the worst examples where we feel perhaps it's highly questionable the motives of folks doing it, where we think it's not a bad idea, not a bad way of dealing with some of the creeps out there. And we want to talk about the sort of things that folks can do if it happens to them and they feel that it's unjust. And
preventative measures. And now something triggered something in me now. Just now, you said the creeps out there. But so cyberbullying, we think of trolls, we think of sextortion, we think of creeps, we think of terrible things. But online shaming, not necessarily always creeps. I mean, I think it's more that mob mentality, the mob lynching, that people kind of just get on the bandwagon and voice their opinion, and they actually don't realize that they're ruining individuals' lives, and as a result, they're impacting the reputation of organizations.
So true. They don't realize the power of what they can do. But some people jump on, and as you say, the fact that you're anonymous or you can remain anonymous, they just don't know when to let go. But yeah, certainly it's I'm talking about the creeps, though. The creeps who in many ways provoke the people to shame them because of the crazy things and the nasty things that they do.
Yep.
But let's talk about some cases here. I mean, I think we were both highly taken with the story from London and England of the ketchup lawyer.
Isn't that a name? The ketchup lawyer.
Well, it just grabs everybody's attention, doesn't it? Because first of all, you got a lawyer, you've got ketchup, and you've got a £4 dry cleaning fee.
Yes.
So £4, well, about $6, $8, depending on which dollars you're talking about. So a small amount, I think, for we'd all agree. And it was an instance, and we both love this, because it was an instance between a lawyer, and because it's a London lawyer, a well-paid lawyer, making £150,000 according to news reports. Let's say $300,000, and he gives his secretary a bill, or he tells her he wants paid for dry cleaning because she spilled some ketchup on his pants when they were having lunch.
Yeah, and I have the quote here. So he sent her an email saying, and I guess we won't use names just to kind of not give in to this online shaming.
Yeah.
So he says hi, and he says the secretary's name. He says, I went to dry cleaners at lunch, and they said it would cost £4 to remove the ketchup stains. If you could let me have the cash today, that would be much appreciated. And so what she did was she actually missed the email. She didn't respond right away because she was at her mother's funeral. So it was very terrible timing on his part as well. And when she got back, she saw this, and I suppose with the emotion of everything, what she did was she circulated it internally for all of the corporate attorneys and the corporate professionals that were in this corporate division of the law firm. And it wasn't even an external online shaming thing. It was an internal mockery, shaming of this attorney. And he, as a result, gave his notice. He left.
Yeah, well, I think at the end of the day, he had the paparazzi of London camping outside his apartment, trying to take pictures of him. He was in the headlines of the major newspapers of the city, and he got noticed. It got out by, I guess, the email exchange was copied and pushed around by the secretary. Then it went to other lawyers who then fired it around the legal community, and after that, of course, it went viral. But what a case though. Signs of Danger, catchy short title. It's a memorable situation, an unexpected situation. There's the opportunity for it to go viral because it can get out.
There's that relatability factor.
Relatability
and the poor.
Yeah, it's the imbalance or the seeming imbalance of power, and and then an emotional connection. My first thought, I think we talked about this. Your first thought too was, well, what was this guy thinking? I mean, to ask for £4 to a secretary when her mother was dying, going to a funeral. How did that happen? But then, I had more thoughts about the whole thing. And I looked at it and go, well, how did it come to this? First of all, the story, if you read into the story a bit further, he didn't know that her mother was sick or that she was going to a funeral. So he didn't know any of that side of things.
Just bad timing, unfortunately.
Bad timing. Also, what's behind this story? So if I spilled ketchup on your pants and we were in a restaurant, I think my first reaction would be, I'm so sorry, Melissa. What an idiot I am. Let me take care of that for you. You might say, Garth, don't worry about it. It's just the way it has happened. And we would have moved on. So there's something kind of went wobbly here in that exchange. Was she flinging ketchup around the place? She didn't offer to make amends? Or I don't know, we're missing some big elements of the whole thing.
Which is often the case, especially. Which
is always the case, isn't it? We miss the context behind all this.
And it's so easy. It's interesting because it just brings it to mind. I was watching Monica Lewinsky's TED Talk from this year, 2015. And
great talk.
My goodness, what a great talk. And what a great, how eloquent she is and what a great speaker. And it's the same thing. And if you look at this is much on a much larger scale. And she talks about, people don't see the human being behind the story, and you don't know all of the pieces. You don't know what her side is, or that simply we forget sometimes as human beings when we get into this mob lynching mob mentality that we've all made mistakes. We all have areas in our past that we're not necessarily very proud of, that we grew and learned from. And, so it's very common and unfortunate when when the full story gets lost or just isn't even told. And then you have these online shamings that come of it and ruined reputations as a result.
And maybe the upshot's going to be that people are going to write down nothing and be very, very circumspect in their ways of dealing with others, probably to the detriment of communication and full communication, and also trying to sort things out themselves. That other case of the lady who was at the tech conference and who didn't like the crude humor. Why would she? Why would anybody? Didn't like the crude humor of a couple of guys sitting behind her at this conference. So she didn't confront them. She turned around, smiled according to the stories, took their photograph and tweeted about the idiots behind her. The upshot was people knew who they were, and it got back to their bosses, and they were fired on the spot.
Well, it gained a lot of media attention, especially today. Misogyny and, a lot of women's rights and women equality and things like that. They're very big right now in the headlines, and rightfully so. And absolutely. So adding this to a societal issue that is very at the forefront right now was perfect timing. It escalated. These two men were publicly shamed online. It went further than just, her community or their community. And they did lose their jobs. And it was interesting to learn, to hear their comments after, where they were saying, we loved our job and we have a family that we need to support. And we didn't realize the magnitude of, we thought we were just joking around. But then the question begins of, should they really have lost their job? So we can get into a whole debate on whether or not, and for organizations out there who are too quick to jump to security blanket solutions, let's call them, could that be a potential issue for the organization? It didn't happen in this case, but for that organization that jumps too quickly and fires somebody on account of something that they're being publicly shamed for example, couldn't that turn around on the organization? Like, did they not thinking that through properly? Could that result in shaming or reputation damage for the organization that responded to rashly?
And it brings up that big question, of course, that age-old question of, does the punishment fit the crime? So certainly they were rude, they were coarse, they were abysmally behaved. Should they have lost their jobs for it, or should they have been asked to leave? And end of the conference. I mean, what did the punishment fit the crime? Yeah,
or could she have just turned around and maybe taught them something calmly, not getting rash, but said, "Hey, I can hear you, and you're offending me." Maybe it would have turned into a totally different scenario, where she would have actually taught them the lesson that they ultimately learned without all the dire consequences. And what I find is really interesting about this particular case is that she eventually lost her job too as a result of this.
She did, yeah, she did. Apparently, I think what we read was that she lost her job for just being, was it difficult to work with, something like that?
No, I closed the tab, unfortunately, so I don't have it open, but from my recollection was that she began to be publicly shamed because they lost their jobs and people thought that the punishment didn't fit the crime. And her organization for which she worked didn't want that type of attention. That was my understanding, and I could be, not dead on there, but that was my understanding from what I read.
Yeah, that sounds similar to what I got from the whole thing as well. I think it's worth mentioning, of course, also that she is a pretty serious lady when it comes to social media. She had 9,000 followers. So whenever she tweets something like that's a big deal. And what broke the story was one of her followers out of that 9,000 was a serious influencer from Mashable. with like 5 million. So like once it goes there, you thought it was a good story, and bang. So I guess the bottom line in all this is you never really know who you're messing with when it comes to situations like this.
You certainly don't. And there's another case, which I think it's such a great case for so many different levels, but Justine Sacco, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing her name properly, but I'm sure that a lot of people listening probably remember that case. It happened at the end of 2013, and she tweeted out right before she went on a plane to South Africa, I believe. She wrote, "Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding, I'm white." She tweeted that out. She went on the plane, and oh my goodness. And speaking of followers, she had something like 174 followers or something.
Yeah, it was nothing at all.
It was nothing, but one publisher for, I have it here in my notes, Gawker, I believe. Yeah. One publisher for Gawker saw that. And right away, I didn't even need much of a description in his blog post. He posted about it. He blogged about it. And the thing went viral. Rightfully, I mean, it would go viral. And, to head everything off, or to, put this on a grander scale, this woman was the senior director of corporate communications for a large organization. And she tweeted this. So I think also the fact that she had PR communications in her title, and that she was a senior executive, that she was held to a higher standing. And even though she posted this from her personal account, the thing went mad. I mean, she was on the plane for 12 hours, and Twitter started trending with the hashtag has Justine landed yet?
And you call it appalling, bad taste, or you can find lots of words for what she did. She ended up, when she got off the plane in Johannesburg, she'd been fired. So she got on the plane going, yeah, I'm making a comment here on Twitter. Got off the plane, and she couldn't believe that she had no job, and that the social media world had erupted all around her.
And it's interesting. This happened, not only had it erupted all around her, so she got off the plane to find out that she didn't have a job. She also got off the plane, and there was somebody waiting for her in the airport to snap a picture.
That's right. And you can get that picture online. Yeah,
yes.
That's right.
And then, of course, she came to, this hashtag was trending on Twitter. That's a big deal. And people playing along. They even had created this thing on Google that so when you get your flight information on Google or from Google, you can kind of visualize what you get there. They had this Google real-time thing when you search for her name in Google search, so Justine Sacco, you'd get that flight information, and it actually showed at what point in real time she was to landing. And the Twitter sphere, the social sphere just exploded. She got off to harassment, and it even hit home because she has family. She's, I think, originally from South Africa, and her family was embarrassed and very ashamed of her for writing such a tweet. So imagine that. And she ended up losing her job, and her reputation, and you name it, all in the midst of 12 hours that she wasn't even, and that's kind of the downside, is that she wasn't able to respond quicker, to apologize or to take it back, or to realize, that what she did was very, ignorant and shouldn't have been done. But she didn't even have that opportunity while this whole crisis was unfolding and escalating on her behalf. She wasn't even present to do something about it, which is unfortunate for her.
Sure was. I think it took her a long time to find another job. I'm not even sure if she found anything.
She did. Actually, yeah. What I think is really interesting, and it kind of brings back points of what we were just saying. So kind of this happened to herself. She did this, and this happened as a result. Yeah. She lost her job. And, actually one of the things, even Donald Trump had tweeted. He had tweeted, hashtag has Justine landed yet? Justine, what the hell are you doing? Are you crazy? Not nice or fair. I will support at Aid for Africa. Justine is fired, of course, in the Donald Trump fashion. She had Donald Trump and people of the likes tweeting at her and about
Which
her.
adds to the whole thing, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Donald Trump weighs in, whatever you think of him, but he's a celebrity, and when he weighs in, more people take notice. So it trends even more.
Of course,
something like that.
And so as a result, I think that the fact that she was fired in this case, I think that unfortunately for her, I do understand. I read, and I'll talk about it after. I read some statements from her, and I read, from afterwards. But I think it's an unfortunate situation. I think it was a lack of judgment on her part. But because she had that position, because she had the title of Senior Director of Corporate Communications for this large organization, I think they had no choice. I mean, you're held to a higher standard when you're in the communications department, period. Never mind when you're the senior executive of communications for the corporate organization. So I do think that unfortunately for her, the penalty of losing her job was fitting. I think that it was important especially for the comment that she put on Twitter, that it was important for the organization from a crisis management standpoint to distance themselves from her very quickly, because even though it came from her personal account, she represents this organization, like it or not.
And she got hammered for the unusualness and the memorableness of the situation. So when you get a hashtag going like "Has Justine landed yet?" Now you've got a sense of drama into the whole thing. Absolutely. So she paid a heavy price just for the circumstances that she found herself in.
Absolutely.
But I mean, it's changed her life. It's damaged her hugely. Terribly offensive thing to say, but who among us have not done or said something stupid at some time?
The difference is that the majority of us, hopefully, haven't done so on social, which is what people need to realize.
That's the thing, isn't it? I guess what we're finding now is, what it's coming out in our discussion here, is that there are new rules of engagement out there, and there's new standards of civility being set, and what we're getting here are the extremes, while people try and figure out the whole role and their role inside social media. And people, don't really get it. I mean, if you had 174 followers on Twitter, could you, in your wildest dreams, predict something like this? I don't think you could, until it happens, and then people go, "Yeah, I guess anything could happen."
I think if you had to the way that this particular issue magnified, amplified, went crazy viral. I mean, having people put things on Google that, comes up when you Google her name, and of course everybody's Googling her name within those 12 hours. So this just magnified. But what I found was interesting is the person responsible for bringing it to everybody's attention. So that blogger from Gawker, he got an email from her 6 months later, and it said something like, basically, Justine Sacco here, period. And he describes in this blog post how it just it stopped his heart. He was, oh my goodness. I think that he mentions that he kind of felt a little bit guilty, but he couldn't really put his finger on the guilt that he was feeling until he heard from her. And basically what she did was she reached out to him half a year later and said, "I'd like to meet you. I'd like to go, grab a drink." And he did, and he met her. And the whole blog post describes, for the first drink, and halfway through the meal, they just did small chat, and he felt so guilty the whole time because he knew what happened as a result of his blog post. And what I found very interesting, he apologized to her after, knowing that, what she said was wrong, but he had never, and this is, me paraphrasing his message, was he didn't ever imagine. First of all, being Gawker, you have to be, first, and you want the hits, you want the click-throughs, you want the eyes, you want all of that. So he thought, great, this is a great piece, I'm going to publish it right away. He never imagined it to escalate the way that it did. He never imagined it for it to have such consequences on her life the way that it did. And he felt very responsible and very badly for what happened and for his role in it. And, he just goes on in the blog post to say how graceful she was, and how she explained that apparently she has family in South Africa. So she did not mean what she said. She apparently was, and this is the part I would have quoted, but paraphrasing, apparently she was doing it the tweet was meant to be obviously not from her, so unlike her that it showed the ignorance of people who, first of all, don't know about, AIDS, and don't know that it's not, you don't have to be, there's, an AIDS epidemic, unfortunately, in North America right now. So people who aren't aware of the magnitude and the severity and the realities of AIDS, and also racist people.
Yeah,
So,
she meant it to be, it was more irony.
Yes, exactly.
And but it was read straight.
It was read straight. And of course, because she was on the plane for 12 hours without reception, she didn't have the opportunity before it amplified to even attempt to justify herself or to, right the wrong and explain herself. And by the time she landed, there was no opportunity. That opportunity was gone.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting to hear from his perspective that he actually went for supper with her 6 months later and realized, and then he talks, and basically the blog post that he wrote was about online shaming and how we get into this mob mentality and how we don't realize when we do these things how much of an impact we can potentially have on somebody's life. And it's very true, because there's people who commit suicide from things like this.
And isn't that the case? So, with any sort of bullying, really, bullies don't really don't think about the damage that they're really doing.
No.
It's somewhat like fun to them or something.
Yeah, unfortunately.
That's the sad part of it.
Unfortunately.
But what it does teach us, I guess, from all this is that when it comes to social media, there are no take-backs. You can't undo it. You can't unring the bell. You do it, you have to live with it.
And, in a prevention, so what does this mean for organizations? Of course, we can see what it means for professional brands, which every single person listening to this podcast is their own personal professional brand. So, tons of lessons there that are kind of self-explanatory. But in terms of organizations, you wouldn't expect let's use Justine as an example, you wouldn't expect this type of incident to occur because of a direct tweet, not even she wasn't hacked, it wasn't a rogue tweet, it wasn't a direct tweet from a senior director of corporate communications from your organization. So I think as a preventative measure, it's very important no matter what level we're talking about, because again, you wouldn't expect it necessarily from your senior executive. So I think it's very important for organizations to have these discussions with their teams on every single level to go through what are the consequences for them as well as for the organization, for them personally, as well as the repercussions for them and their job at that, in that position. So that is something that organizations need to start thinking more about and leaving less to chance.
That, and also having the ability, if you do do something crazy like that, and you want to take it back, well, have you got your apology structure in place? I'm always reminded of the work that the great guy called Peter Sandman. If you're interested in this sort of work, you go and Google him. The 5 steps to an apology. You got to, first of all, own it. Like, I did it. I'm sorry. Sorry the way your mummy would like you to say sorry. I'll make it up to you. Be point number 3. Here's how it won't happen again. Number 4, and then number 5, do some sort of penance, suffer. Like, it could be the suffering, could be the humiliation.
Absolutely.
If you do that, then people go, well, okay, paid your dues, as it were.
We hope.
But a very recent one that we were talking about there was the fisherman. In, I guess, Nova Scotia, here in Canada. Weird. I mean, talk about weird. And these things, it goes by the weirdness, I think. Here was this fisherman who was in a catch and release. So you have your fun catching the fish, and then you're supposed to take it off the hook and throw it back in. But he was videotaped from a cell phone from somebody on a nearby boat, where when he caught the fish, he beat it over the head and he killed it. He didn't release it.
Yeah, he clubbed it.
So the other fisherman went up and said, hey, you're not supposed to do that. Don't you get it? And I don't know what the exchange was, but it wasn't great. And the other fisherman decided to put this on YouTube with details of the individual.
300,000 views.
300,000 views, yeah. And he was fined because the fishery department got involved now because what he did was illegal. So they fined him the maximum, $1,000 fined, and banned from fishing for 2 years. But he's getting hate mail now, and people are threatening him. He's saying, you should be clubbed.
Yeah.
And you should be thrown back in, which is like, wow, what he did was wrong. Man, that's That's harsh
Yeah.
indeed.
And he even says that I'm sure you saw the same one, a video with him from a news organization that did the coverage. And he goes, I can't even go to the grocery store without being harassed. And he said, is what I did wrong? Maybe. But do I deserve this level of harassment and bullying and threats? No. And it's true. And I understand too that it's an emotional thing, especially when it comes to animals and life. People are very emotional. People are very it's very controversial. It pings at our heartstrings. But at the same time, we have to remember the whole story. His defense, and I don't think he says it in a way that he thinks that he can defend himself, but he just kind of says that the fish was suffering. There was no way that it wasn't going to die. So I was trying to do it, a kind gesture, basically, which hunters can relate to that. Other people can't necessarily relate to that. So there's mixed emotion there. It's very controversial. But at the same time, the point is that he wasn't maliciously beating a fish to death just to throw him back into the water.
Yeah, I see. I think we'll never really know the full story of this because and we don't know the story. So I'm gonna a guess here that if the other fisherman was a true fisherman to him, if he had that explanation, why wouldn't he have agreed to it? Said, sure, the fish was badly damaged. You did the right, yeah, I understand totally. I would do the same thing. But that didn't come through.
Did the confrontation not look hostile to you? It's been a while since I looked at that. It looked like hostile. The person, the one who clubbed the fish, it looked like he didn't receive. It kind of looked like there was something there. He wasn't too open to having a conversation about it.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, we'll never know what transpired before that particular video. So we don't know what other things maybe were witnessed or what other sort of behavior was witnessed. We'll just never know. But what we do is we see the consequences of the whole thing, and it's one of these really odd stories that goes viral.
Yep.
And you say 300,000.
And this
hits.
is a small town. 300
small, tiny town. Yeah.
So that's a lot of numbers.
But this goes all the way back to. Do you remember the Kramer from Seinfeld?
I saw in your note in our communications back and forth about, and I wanted to say, no, you have Kramer from Seinfeld and Mel Gibson. So I wanted to hear about those.
Yeah, well, those are two really unusual combos. But I remember when Kramer. One of the reasons why you don't hear any more from Kramer from Seinfeld was that I think it was back in.
You're talking about the actor.
The actor, yes, yeah. When he went on a stage to do a stand-up comedian routine, he was being heckled by a black man in the audience, and for some reason he just snapped at the heckler, and he pulled out the N-word on a rant that went so long that there was no way it could have been anything other than, this guy's got a real problem with this situation. And people were walking out of the comedy club in disgust.
Wow.
And that got, I know, like a 1.5 million views, still up there on, I think it's the first thing you see if you Google Kramer on YouTube, it'll pop up. And that's I think that essentially ended his career. Well, and no amount of apology because it went on for too long, and it was too deep.
And in this case, this is what I kind of look at these types of situations. First of all, we're talking about a personal brand, so that's always an interesting case on its own. There's differences from corporate organizations and their brands, but I always look at this and I say, what's the truth here? The truth is that the people in that audience and those who will watch the footage saw the true him. And that is, there's no apology. When you show your true self and your true self is ugly in that sense, you can't apologize for that. Especially there's not really, you can make a mistake and apologize. And like you said in the 5 steps to an apology, say, be very sincerely regretful and become a better person and work, you could do all the right things. But on that level, I think, and we see it also with other personal brands. I mean, Paula Deen, who ended up making a comeback after time, and that's great. But at the time when she went through her crisis, I think it was 2 years ago, maybe now, she kept, in her responses, she kept sticking her foot in her mouth. She kept, not fully, sincerely apologizing. And that showed people that there was more to her. She was revealing a side to herself that she wasn't regretful to a certain extent. Maybe she was a little bit, but she also came across as, in those cases where she was regretful because she was now, suffering consequences for her actions. More, she was trying to paint herself as the victim. And this was very transparent, or very evident to me anyways, as a crisis professional, watching her apologies, or what I called her non-apologies, and then watching all of her funding, all of her partners, all of her sponsors leave her. And as a result, she lost millions upon, I think it was like $10 million a year in revenue that she lost not on account of her initial actions, but on account of her, let's call them non-apologies, and on account of, how she managed the crisis. And how she managed the crisis was very much, in my opinion, portrayed her true self, in which case organizations were saying, whoa, we need to distance ourselves from this person.
Smacks of the whole Tiger Woods fiasco when he tried an apology and it was lacked some luster.
Yes.
As well.
Yes.
But one thing we should mention before we go is maybe the harshest of all, which is the idea of doxing. Dox and DOX, and that's social media talk for documents, and that's when you want to shame someone, and you don't just go to social media, but you get information around them. So you find out their phone number, their address, their kid's school, social security number, relationships, financial history, whatever you can find, and you put that out on the internet as well, so that other people can grab that and do even more with it.
That's a disgusting thing to do.
So that's harsh too, and that's where some of this is going.
And yeah.
And I get a big part of it is because a lot of the documentation is not that hard to find on the internet nowadays, and people put a lot of information out there on Facebook. We talked about that ourselves, about how much information there is available to people. Mm-hmm. That if they choose to misuse it, they can have a field day with you.
Yeah, and I guess that's the risk. And there's so many different levels of takeaways, I think, in this entire conversation between the two of us in this podcast. And if we look at, just individuals, personal brands, personal safety as well, now talking about this doxing, we have to be aware of this. We have to be aware as individuals that, people say it all the time, think before you publish, or when you put something on social, it's on social for forever. It gets indexed in Google. It's, findable for forever. You cannot take that back. I think that the other one, I guess, that we hear is that, I just said that, think before you publish. And unfortunately, we hear these things and I don't know if it's that not everybody in the moment you think that it couldn't happen to you, or you're just, you let, a hot head get the best of you. I don't know what it is, impulse, but we need to practice safe sharing and safe social. That's a tongue twister, safe social, in every single aspect of what we do, whether that's for organizations. For example, look at Bud Light. I guess by the time this airs, it'll be a couple weeks ago now that Bud Light put out the campaign. Well, it's been a campaign that's been going on for about a year and a half now, I believe.
Yeah, the No campaign, eh?
Yeah, hold on, I'm going to pull it up. I have it on my blog. But, it's the same type of thing, except this one for a corporation, where they just didn't second guess, or they didn't risk assess their own wording. And so they put out, for listeners who don't know, it's part of their hashtag Up for Whatever campaign. This campaign's been on for, I want to say, a year. And so tons of their beer bottles are printed with all kinds of different messages that in the humor and in the lighthearted ambiance of saying, hey, you should be up for whatever, enjoy life to its fullest, take chances, all of these great things. And so all of their beer bottles are kind of labeled with these different messagings. They have, I think, 150 messages or something throughout their bottles. But this one in particular came out, it says, the perfect beer for removing no from your vocabulary for the night, hashtag up for whatever, the perfect beer for whatever happens. And this, of course, I believe truly that it was not intended to be malicious, not intended to anything that it was taken. However, it's an unfortunate choice of words that should have been caught within, I think I read that there were 5 different approval processes that went through internally before this particular campaign went out. And it wasn't caught. Nobody even thought to ask themselves, hey, how could this potentially be misconstrued, or what's the worst that can happen from this? Which is something that we need to, whether we're talking personal brands or we're talking organizations, we need to ask ourselves, we need to instill this type of thinking into the very fundamentals, the very foundation of all of our communications, and ask ourselves, take 2 seconds to say, hey, what's the worst that can come of this? Because all of these things, unfortunately, could have been prevented. All of these things that we're talking about.
That's very true. And on the Bud one, as you say, I went through so many layers of scrutiny that there's a part of me that wonders quite cynically if they were very happy to let it through, knowing that they would get the publicity for the so-called edgy campaign, and then they could withdraw it and still have the publicity.
That's possible, but at the same time, if you were to now ask them and say, would you like to be labeled as, and I'm quoting, the official beer of rape culture? Would you like for Bud Light to be labeled, that way on social media, in the search engines, in people's minds, offend people, offend victims, offend so many people? Would you like that? Is it worth the publicity stunt? I would think that they probably still didn't say, well, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm naive, but I would think that they probably didn't think through it. Again, what's the worst that can happen? What is the worst? There's other risque things to do. And I think of things where, in that sense, when, for example, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie that just came out a few months ago, one of their campaign ads for the launch of the movie was the turtles, I have it again on my blog, the turtles jumping from an exploding building, and the release date, the launch of the video of the movie when it was going to be in theaters was September 11th, 2014. And they chose, and so cynically, I suppose, and again, I don't have any inside information on this. I don't know whether or not it's true or not what I'm about to say, but my mind tends to go, that might be a case where they wanted the publicity. But again, it could have been an innocent and very naive and very ignorant mistake.
Could have been. It reminds me of the Tiger Woods come back to life with a Nike. Whenever he was his sponsorship deals were in jeopardy, and a couple of years later, the campaign came back, and I recall the headline was something like, "Winning makes everything okay." So,
wow,
so that if you're going to go that route,
come on, that one's asking. But then again, maybe we look at this, we look at it every day. This is the way our brains work, you and I. So maybe it's just so easy to see. But how could you miss that one?
Yeah, I don't know if you do miss it, but that's probably a whole other discussion, getting into all that.
Probably. So I guess final takeaways or words of wisdom for listeners?
Well, I think certainly what can organizations do? I think you have got a lot to say about search engine optimization strategy and what people should be doing whenever you are in a bad situation and you're getting hammered on your SEO structures.
Well, the biggest thing with search engines is that we can't. You can never control it, right? We don't have any way of knowing when Google's going to change their algorithms or what's going to pop up when something's on the 5th page for the last 3 years. Maybe next month it'll be on the first page, not something you want on the first page. But the biggest thing in order to structure as a crisis preparedness strategy, organizations want to pay attention to the structural foundation of their online presence. So make sure that, because it's easy to rank well in the search engines for your targeted keywords when everything is great and life is good and sunshines and flowers and great marketing campaigns and that. It's another thing to keep and hold those rankings when you're in a crisis, and a crisis that's gone viral, and the whole world seems to be writing about you, publishing about you, sharing about you. So as a crisis preparedness strategy, it's very important for organizations to think of, yes, their search engine optimization, the foundational structure of their online presence as a whole, and to do what they can prior to a crisis to make that as solid and secure as possible, so that in a crisis, you don't have to think about that. You don't have to worry about, oh my goodness, are we on page 5 of Google, and is it going to take us 3 years to get back to the top of page 1, if ever, or are we going to, but to focus in a crisis on managing the crisis and kind of knowing in the back of your minds that you've done everything that you could, and now after the crisis, post-crisis, part of the picking up the pieces and managing post-crisis is reworking your reputation. So that's an important note.
And I think as a final takeaway from what we're talking about, I think what we're seeing, I feel, is we're seeing new rules of social engagement being worked out. And there's some terrible judgment out there in how they're applied. And we don't want everybody going after each other on social media every time they see something that they don't like. But on the other hand, we got to ask ourselves, or do we? Because everybody who's been hammered like this, it's been a lesson to everybody who comes after them. So is this the new civility? I guess the answer is only time will tell.
You mean that they learned a lesson when the people who made the mistake?
Yeah, well, and everybody who read about or followed what happened to them, going, wow, I better be a hell of a lot more careful.
Yeah.
Think of all the examples. You're looking at somebody, you're out there fishing, and you go, is that guy in the next boat, has he got a camera? You're at a conference and you're talking to somebody, you think, wow, maybe somebody in front of me is listening to what I'm saying and judging it in some way, whatever it is. There's so many more opportunities for everything that we do to be recorded and used in whatever way, no matter what it is that we're doing. With a certain spin to it.
I guess on the bright side, we might think that eventually, perfect world scenario, that with the knowledge or the consideration that people might be watching and people might be filming, and you never know when something can be used against you, would create a beautiful society, wouldn't it? Everybody would just act, the way that they're supposed to act and be courteous. And I don't think that that's the case. Unfortunately, it's human nature.
It could create, rather than a utopia, it could create some sort of dystopia where what a stunningly sanitized and boring place to live.
I would say that's true. But I would say, though, for professionals out there, and everybody who's listening to this podcast is a professional in some line of communication, crisis, risk management, and so you are held to a higher standard. I mean, if Justine Sacco had been in a different division, maybe she would have had the same repercussions. Maybe she would have had slightly less repercussions. Maybe she wouldn't have lost her job. I don't know. But I'm just saying that she was held to a higher standard because of her position within the organization. And people expect more from communicators. So we have to set the example for ourselves, for our colleagues, and people that you manage under you, and your employees and your team, as well as for your own self and for your own reputation. We need to start thinking more clearly, whether it's for the campaigns that go out or whether it's your personal tweet with only 174 followers from your personal account.
And what's the lesson for the gawker reporter, I wonder, who will maybe think 2 or 3 times before he fires off something like that? Now he knows the consequences. Yes,
I think so. I think he made that clear in that blog post I read about him, and I thought that it was a beautifully written piece for people. And actually, to quote Monica Lewinsky in her TED Talk, she writes that online we have a compassion deficit and an empathy crisis. And she's right. And so we're talking about organizations, but on the other side, when we're talking about cyberbullying, we're talking about online shaming and personal brands, one of the biggest, if you have, for listeners out there, if you haven't listened to Monica Lewinsky's TED Talk, please go listen to it. It's 20 minutes. It's wonderful. She does a brilliant job. And one of the things that she says is that she considered taking her life when she was going through what she was going through almost 2 decades ago. And what stopped her were the little pieces of compassion that she found. So whether that was from a friend or a family or a stranger, oddly, whereas she was so used to strangers shaming her. And she makes a really great point that kind of spoke to me in saying, when you see somebody being shamed online, for example, even if they made a mistake, I think that as human beings, as compassionate souls, that we should remember that everybody makes mistakes, that we don't know the full picture, the full story. We are not ever provided with the full story. And to paraphrase Monica Lewinsky, who says, even if there's 1,000 people that are shaming this one person, if you are the person to send one little word of encouragement, that can make all the difference and potentially save a life if that person was contemplating committing suicide, as a worst case example. So I kind of wanted to end on that note, on a personal, individual note, because we do live in a society where this is all the reality. And I thought it was an interesting and very, very real, very heartfelt, very just really informative lesson or takeaway that Monica Lewinsky put in her speech.
And so certainly this is a topic that we'll be following with great interest, and we'll see how the new rules, if there are going to be any rules whatsoever, if there'll be some sort of social rulings applied in this new wider village that we live in, we'll be following it and looking for a variety of examples.
Absolutely.
But great area of discussion, and it's a sign of our times.
It definitely is. Garth, it's always such a pleasure chatting with you. Where can people find and follow all your good stuff?
Well, they can find me at beready.ca. And I pop up on your website.
You do.
Quite a bit. And hopefully we'll be podcasting more together.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. People can stay tuned for that. All right. Thank you so much, Garth.
Thanks for having me on. Cheers.
Thank you for tuning in and listening to this week's episode of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast with me, Melissa Agnes. I release a new episode every Sunday, so if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe to this Crisis Intelligence Podcast on iTunes or Stitcher so you don't miss out on any future episodes. While you're at it, feel free to leave me a rating or review on iTunes. This will go such a long way in helping me get this important information to more people just like you to help benefit their crisis management and crisis communications. Additionally, if you'd like to have me come and speak at an upcoming event that you may be organizing, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. You can email me at melissa@melissaagnes.com. Thanks so much for tuning in this week, and I look forward to talking even more crisis intelligence with you next Sunday.